Hello. Thanks for tuning into the video. If you enjoy listening to scary stories, feel free to subscribe to my channel as I upload daily. I would really appreciate any support. Today, I have 4 true scary stories that were given to me from people on the internet. And now, let's begin. I've lived in Colorado for the past 7 years. I moved here when I was 25, drawn by the mountains, the promise of snowy winters, and the kind of quiet you can only find away from the big cities. I grew up in Dallas, where everything felt too loud, too fast, and far too crowded for someone like me. I needed space to breathe, to think, to exist without the constant hum of traffic and the glare of neon lights. So, when the opportunity came to transfer within my company to a smaller branch in Colorado Springs, I jumped at it without hesitation. At 32, I've grown to love the life I've built here. My days are predictable but comforting. A steady 9-to-5 job in marketing, evenings spent hiking or catching up on books, and weekends driving up winding mountain roads just to see where they take me. There's a certain tranquility in routine, a peace that comes from knowing what to expect. That night started like any other Friday. I worked late to finish a project, leaving the office around 9 p.m. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few scattered cars and the faint glow of streetlights reflecting off the pavement. The air was crisp, the kind of chill that settles into your bones as fall gives way to winter. I remember pausing for a moment, taking in the stillness before making my way to my car. As I unlocked my car, a voice called out from across the lot. "Hey, excuse me, sir, can you help me out?" I turned to see a man standing next to an older sedan, its hood propped open. He looked to be in his mid-30s with short brown hair and a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His jeans were worn and his jacket was a little thin for the weather. "My car won't start," he said, gesturing to the open hood. "Battery's dead, I think. Do you have jumper cables?" It seemed innocent enough. I've been stranded with a dead battery before, and I know how frustrating it can be. Still, something about him made me pause. Maybe it was the way his eyes darted around, never quite meeting mine, or the fact that his smile felt practiced, like it had been rehearsed one too many times. "Yeah, I have cables," I replied cautiously. "Give me a second. They're in my trunk." As I turned back to my car, a flicker of movement caught my eye. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the lot, stretching and bending over the asphalt. And that's when I saw it. Behind the man's car, partially obscured by the open trunk, was another shadow. Someone crouched low, trying to stay hidden. My pulse quickened. Every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong. "Actually," I said quickly, forcing a smile, "I think I left them in my back seat. Let me check." I opened my car door, slid into the driver's seat, and locked the doors in one fluid motion. My hands trembled as I started the engine. The man's smile vanished. He stepped forward, waving his arms. "Wait! No, wait, please. I really need help." I didn't wait. Tires screeched as I sped out of the lot, my heart pounding in my chest. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man sprinting back to his car. To my horror, the engine roared to life, despite his earlier claims. They were following me. My mind raced as I navigated the dark streets, the headlights behind me growing brighter with every turn. I couldn't go home. I didn't want them to know where I lived. I needed somewhere safe, somewhere public, the police station. I pushed the accelerator, weaving through traffic, but they stayed close, their car a constant presence in my mirrors. My breathing was shallow, panic creeping in. Finally, the red and blue lights of the police station came into view. I swerved into the lot, tires screeching, as I came to an abrupt stop. The other car hesitated, then sped past, disappearing into the night. Inside, I explained everything to the officers. They reviewed the security footage from my office parking lot, but the license plate on the car wasn't registered. It was as if the two men never existed. To this day, they were never found. It's funny. I've always been the kind of person who likes being alone. I enjoy the quiet, the space to think, to read, to just exist without the constant noise of other people. I'm a baker, and I've had my own small bakery for about 5 years now. It's a cozy place, not fancy, but it has its charm. The kind of place where you can feel the warmth of the ovens on your skin and smell the sugar in the air before you even walk in the door. I'd always loved the idea of running a bakery. Growing up, I spent hours with my grandmother in her kitchen, learning how to knead dough, make the perfect pie crust, and even decorate cakes. It was a quiet sort of connection, something we shared. When she passed, I realized I needed to carry on that tradition, and I was determined to make it happen. The bakery was my little slice of peace, and I thought I knew every corner of it. I knew the creaks in the floorboards, the way the back door didn't close all the way unless you slammed it hard enough, the spots where the light in the ceiling flickered a bit. It was my routine. I knew the customers, the local families, the regulars who came in for their morning coffee and pastries, and I knew the rhythms of the business. But recently, something had been off. It started small, barely noticeable. A few things out of place. Flour spilled on the counter, a spoon moved from where I'd left it. The faintest smell of burnt bread lingering when I was sure I'd turned off the oven. At first, I chalked it up to the stress of running a small business. Maybe I was just overworked. Then, it got worse. One night, I was closing up the shop around 9 p.m. after the last customer had left, and the sun had already set. The air outside was crisp, the kind of cold that nipped at your skin and made you long for warmth. I turned off the lights and was locking the back door when I heard something from upstairs. The bakery had a small apartment above it, which was where I lived. It wasn't big, but it was enough for me. Just one room, a bathroom, and a little kitchen. I hadn't been upstairs in a few hours, so I assumed I'd left something on, maybe the TV or the radio. But then I heard the sound again. Footsteps. I froze. My heart started to race. I hadn't been up there, and I knew there was no one else in the building. I'd locked up, checked the place thoroughly before I closed the shop for the night. The stairs creaked, the kind of creaks that only come from weight being put on them. These were not the kind of sounds that happened when the building settled. I stepped back, pressing myself against the wall beside the back door. I listened. Nothing. For a few minutes I stood there, my fingers frozen around the doorknob. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe a rat, a draft making the old wood groan, but my gut told me otherwise. I decided to go up. I grabbed the broom from the kitchen and crept upstairs, moving slowly and quietly, my breathing shallow. The apartment was dim, only lit by the glow of a streetlight outside. Nothing looked out of place. The kitchen was the same as I'd left it, the bed unmade like usual, the couch empty. I glanced over the room once more. Everything was where it should be, except the bathroom door was slightly ajar. My pulse quickened. I don't know why, but I couldn't bring myself to just push it open. I stood there for a moment, waiting, listening. There was nothing. Then I heard it. A faint rustling. I swear I felt something cold settle in my stomach. My grip on the broom tightened, my fingers growing numb from the tension. The rustling came again, more distinct now, like the sound of paper being shifted or something dragging across the floor. I forced myself to move. I stepped forward, pushed the door open with one quick motion. There was nothing in the bathroom, but something caught my eye in the mirror. The reflection of the shower curtain was shifted to the side, just enough that I could see into the tub. My heart nearly stopped. There was a man lying in the bathtub, covered in shadows, his body curled up as though he had been there for hours. His clothes were dirty, torn in places, and he was motionless. For a split second I thought I was going to faint. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet. I didn't even think. I just ran. I bolted down the stairs, out the back door, and into the alley. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip my phone as I dialed 911. The dispatcher answered quickly, and I managed to get out the words between gasps. "Someone's in my apartment. I think they're in the bathroom. Please, you have to send someone." They told me to stay on the line and keep a safe distance. I could barely hear her over the pounding in my chest. I was still standing in the alley, pacing in a daze. My eyes kept darting back toward the building, as if expecting to see movement in the windows. The police arrived within minutes, but when they went upstairs, they found nothing. No man in the bathtub, no signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone had been there at all. They told me I was probably just exhausted, that I had imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. I felt him there. I saw him in the mirror. They left, but I couldn't stay. I spent the rest of the night at a friend's house, too scared to even sleep in my own bed. The next day, I went over every inch of the apartment again. I checked every door, every window. The locks were secure. The bathtub was empty. But something in my mind wouldn't let me forget the way he had looked in the mirror. His face barely visible, but there. I stayed in that apartment for a few more weeks, but the dread never left me. Every night, I would hear the same rustling sound, faint and far away, just like before. I kept expecting to find him again, but he never showed up. It's been months since that night, and I've since moved out of the apartment, relocated the bakery, and left the building behind. The new place is quieter, more peaceful, but I still can't shake the memory of that man lying in the tub, his eyes staring up at me from the mirror. And sometimes, just when I think I've forgotten about it all, I hear a rustle, a faint sound in the corner of my mind. And I wonder, is he still out there? It had been one of those exhausting shifts. I worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and it felt like everything had piled on today. Patients, paperwork, and endless hours on my feet. I was drained by the time I got home, my muscles sore and my mind foggy. But when I stepped inside, there was something nagging at me. The attic door was slightly ajar. I was sure I had closed it before I left. I had been meaning to clean up that space for weeks, but it was always pushed to the back of my mind. The attic had become a catch-all, storing old furniture, forgotten belongings, and things I didn't have room for anywhere else. But tonight, something felt off. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you second-guess everything. I hesitated before approaching the door, a strange unease crawling under my skin. Slowly, I pushed it open. The light bulb flickered once before it cast its dim, yellowish glow across the room. The air was thick with dust, and everything was just as I remembered, cluttered with things I hadn't touched in years. But then I heard it, a faint rustling. At first I thought it was just the house settling, but the sound came again, quick and sharp, like someone shifting through papers. My stomach twisted. I had been alone when I left this morning. Hello? My voice trembled slightly, betraying my rising panic. There was no reply. I stepped into the attic, my footsteps muffled by the old wooden floorboards. The rustling continued, coming from the far corner. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. And then I saw him. A man was crouched low in the shadows, his back against the wall, his head tilted slightly, as if waiting for me to notice him. I froze. His face was gaunt, drawn tight with hunger, his skin pale like he hadn't seen sunlight in a long time. His eyes, wide and glassy, locked onto mine immediately, and it was then that I realized just how still he was. Unnervingly still. He didn't move, not even an inch, as if he had been sitting there for hours, or maybe even longer, just waiting. I didn't know what to say. Who are you? The question came out in a near whisper, but he didn't respond. Instead, his lips parted slowly, and in a voice that sounded almost rehearsed, he said, "I've been waiting for you." Every part of my body screamed at me to run. My feet felt frozen to the spot, but my mind was already racing, fighting to make sense of what was happening. Who was this man? How did he get into my house? Why was he just sitting there? Without thinking, I took a step back, then another, and another. The air felt thick with dread. I backed toward the door, but every instinct told me I couldn't stay. I turned, bolting for the stairs. My heart hammered in my chest as I fled down the hallway, each step pounding louder in my ears. I didn't know if he was following me. I didn't look back. I reached the front door, fumbling for the handle. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped my phone. I threw the door open and ran into the night, not stopping until I reached the sidewalk. I called 911 as soon as I could breathe. My voice was a mixture of panic and disbelief. There's a man in my attic. I don't know how he got in, but he's there. Please, you have to send someone. The operator was calm, asking for my address, and reassuring me help was on the way. I stayed on the line, pacing outside, my eyes scanning the windows. I could still feel him. I could still feel his eyes on me, even though I was standing outside, 1,000 feet away. It felt like hours before the police arrived. They checked every room, every closet. They even went into the attic. But they found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no footprints, no evidence anyone had been inside. They told me I must have been mistaken, maybe too tired from my shift to remember things clearly. I didn't argue. I couldn't. But I knew what I had seen. That night, I called a friend and stayed with them. I couldn't bear to be alone in the house. The next few days passed in a blur, work, errands, trying to push the incident to the back of my mind. But it was always there, in the quiet moments, when I turned off the lights and the house settled into darkness. I couldn't shake the memory of his eyes, wide, unblinking, as though he had been waiting for me for a very long time. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the attic. I called the police again a few days later, but they found nothing. No signs of anyone having been there. No evidence to suggest the man had ever been inside. But I knew what I had seen. I moved out of the house a few months later, but even then, I never felt safe. The feeling never left me. Sometimes, when I was alone, I would hear a rustle, just a brief sound that would make my heart race. It was never loud enough to be real, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw him again, the man in my attic. I'm 32 years old, and I've lived in Montana for the past 6 years. I moved here from Chicago, trading the noise and chaos of the city for the wide-open spaces and crisp, clean air of the mountains. I run a small woodworking business, crafting furniture and custom pieces from locally sourced wood. It's solitary work, but I prefer it that way. My days are spent in my workshop, the rhythmic hum of my tools my only company, and my evenings are usually quiet, spent by the fire with a book or hiking the nearby trails. I chose this life for its simplicity, for the chance to escape the stress that used to eat away at me back in the city. My cabin is about 20 miles from the nearest town, a modest place I built with my own hands. It sits on the edge of a dense forest, the kind that swallows sound and light whole once the sun goes down. I always found the isolation comforting until last fall. It started innocently enough. I noticed small things at first. A tool slightly out of place in my workshop. A window I was certain I had closed, left ajar. The faint impression of footprints in the dirt around my cabin that didn't match my own. I brushed it off, thinking I was just being forgetful or paranoid. But then the notes started appearing. The first one was pinned to my front door with a hunting knife. It was a simple piece of paper with one word scrawled in messy handwriting. Soon. My heart pounded in my chest as I read it, and I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I searched the area, but there was no sign of anyone. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, maybe some local kids messing around. But deep down, I knew better. Over the next few days, more notes appeared. Watching, waiting, almost time. Each one left in a place I couldn't miss, my workbench, my kitchen table, even on my pillow while I slept. The worst part was that I never heard anyone. My cabin doors and windows remained locked, and my tools, which could have served as weapons, were always untouched. Whoever was doing this knew how to move silently, how to get in and out without leaving a trace. I stopped sleeping well. Every creak of the wood, every rustle of the wind outside made my pulse race. I started carrying a gun with me, my grandfather's old revolver, something I never thought I'd have to use. I reported the incidents to the local sheriff, but with no evidence and no witnesses, there was little they could do. They promised to patrol the area more frequently, but out here, 20 miles from town, that meant little. Then, one night, everything escalated. I was in my workshop, putting the final touches on a custom dining table, when the power went out. Not just a flicker, but complete darkness. My generator should have kicked in, but it didn't. I reached for my flashlight, the beam slicing through the pitch black. That's when I saw it. A figure standing just outside the window, barely illuminated by the faint moonlight. They were wearing a mask, something crude and homemade, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare straight into me. I grabbed my revolver and bolted outside, but they were gone. I ran around the cabin, calling out, but there was nothing but silence. When I returned to my workshop, there was a new note pinned to the door. Too late. Panic surged through me. I raced back to the cabin, locking every door and window. I called the sheriff, but as I was explaining what happened, I heard a noise from the back room, a slow, deliberate tapping. I ended the call and crept toward the sound, gun raised. The back room was empty, but the window was wide open. I swear I had locked it. On the windowsill was another note. Inside now. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, gun in hand, waiting for something, anything. But dawn came, and nothing happened. I spent the next day reinforcing every lock, installing cameras, and even setting up makeshift traps around my property. I was determined to catch whoever was tormenting me, but it wasn't over. A week later, the cameras caught movement. I checked the footage and saw the masked figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching my cabin for hours without moving. When I went outside to confront them, they were gone. But they left something behind. My old Chicago apartment key, which I hadn't seen in years. I realized this wasn't random. Whoever this was knew me, knew my past. The final confrontation happened 2 nights later. I woke up to the smell of smoke. My workshop was on fire. I grabbed a fire extinguisher and ran outside, but someone tackled me to the ground. We struggled, but I managed to get a glimpse of their face when their mask slipped. It was someone I hadn't seen in a decade, someone I thought was long gone. An old business partner from Chicago, someone I had cut ties with after discovering his criminal activities. He had always blamed me for his downfall. He whispered, "You took everything from me. Now, I'll take everything from you." I managed to break free and fired a warning shot, scaring him off. The fire was too large to save my workshop, but I called the sheriff and they caught him the next day trying to leave the state. He's in prison now, but I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. Every night, I check the locks twice, watch the cameras, and sleep with my gun within reach. Because once someone has decided to destroy your life, they don't stop until they've finished the job. That's all I have for today. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to hear more, be sure to check out my channel. Goodbye.